And because we are running overflow, we'll be repeating this conversation at 3:30 for those who are not able to get in and who can come back later. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Tariq Khdeir to come to the microphone.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be back safe and sound. When I traveled overseas, it was really tough. I've been through a really tough time. As I arrived in the airport, I was actually in the airport. They kept me in the airport for 10 hours. So, and still today, the Palestinian people are suffering. And actually I visited there for 6 weeks. And what I've been through is just a small taste of what they all go through. And the Palestinian people, they don't have rights. And they are not given their rights. And to tell you the truth, over there, when I visited over there, I actually forgot that I had freedom. And for my cousins, I really wish they had the same freedom that I have living in America. And now that I'm back safe, I really appreciate all the freedom and rights that I have and given. And I'm just a kid that was born in Baltimore, and I moved to Tampa at 11 years old, and I'm 15 years old now, and I'm going into the 10th grade. And when I arrived in Palestine, it was so hard to believe what they've been going through. And my first friend over there, the first friend I made was Muhammad Abu Khdeir, the one that was murdered. And the day that he was kidnapped, it was really tough because I passed by him and I asked him a question. I was passing by and I asked him, "Did you want anything from the bakery?" Because me and him were really close friends. He's my best friend. So I asked him if he wanted anything from the bakery, and he's like, "Yeah, sure." I go to the bakery and I come back with a piece of bread, maybe a nice piece of bread, and I find the police there, and I don't find Muhammad there. So I'm really worried at this point. I'm like, there's something wrong. There has to be something wrong. And then I found out he was kidnapped. And at that point, we were losing time. Like every second was important. It was really tough at that point. And at that point, I was scared for his life. I was scared that they were gonna do something that was it was gonna be hard. So, and when we found out that he died and he was murdered, he was stabbed and burnt alive. And it just made us think of like, why, how could they do that? How could they do that to a person? Like, I don't know. So later on that day, to even make it worse, they began to shoot at the whole city. They began to fire at everyone, rubber bullets, and they hurt. So later on that day, I was on the side in an alley down the street from my house. I was in an alley and I was watching the protest. And at that point, I saw a couple people screaming from the left side of me, and they were screaming like a bunch of words. Behind them, I saw soldiers. So I was afraid myself. I was frightened and I was shocked. So everyone panicked and started running because the soldiers were running towards us. And we ran, well, some people ran out of the alley and some people jumped the fence that was in front of us. And I jumped the fence and I kept running for a little bit farther until the Israeli police grabbed me from behind me, slammed my face into the floor, zip-tied my hands behind my back, and started to kick me and punch me in the face and in the ribs. I later on, after a little bit of them beating me, I later on fell unconscious. So I had no idea what was going on after that. Well, I felt the beating for the beginning of it. Then I woke up blindfolded in the jail. They took me to jail right away with no medical treatment, nothing. So at that point, I didn't know what to do. I was confused and I was in so much pain. They didn't take me to the hospital until after 6 hours into the jail. Like, I heard that my dad was out of the jail and trying to get me to a hospital, nearest hospital, so I can get some medical treatment, but they wouldn't let him, like they wouldn't let me go until after 6 hours. And they made me come back to the jail after a couple of hours in the hospital. So I stayed in the jail for 4 days. And on the fourth day, I had a court date. I went to the court date and they sat me in a room for 6 hours until they took person by person for their court date. And it was my turn, and I actually went. I had waited 6 hours. I almost fell asleep in the room. So I go, and I met my parents in this room where I saw a judge and a couple of other people. There was a translator right next to me, so she translated everything for me because they were talking Hebrew. And then they released me on house arrest. They put me on house arrest for 9 days. I had no charges from the beginning. I was never charged. And right when I left Palestine, the day that I left Palestine, they raided my house. They raided my family's house. And they took my uncle and my cousins into custody with no charges. And I really want to thank all the supporters that supported me and made me feel so thankful that I'm American. And I'm really sad for my cousins that are still persecuted in Israel. I have 3 cousins that were arrested with me. They were taken to jail with me, and their names are Kareem, Mohammed, and Mahmoud. They're still in jail till now because they're not American like me. But it doesn't matter. All people should be treated equally. We should all have rights because we're all humans, and we were all created equally. We deserve to have rights. We deserve to be treated equally. And I think my cousins should be treated with the same rights that I have, because they should be treated with the same rights because of how Israel treats the Israelis with those rights. So they've been going through a tough time. So if the Israelis would give the Palestinians the same rights that everyone is given these rights, then there could be a possibility of peace in the Middle East. I pray one day my cousins won't feel scared to walk outside, to be with their friends, to play outside, and not to be scared to go to the store and to have fun, just continue life and be a regular human. Well, I don't want them to be scared. So, thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank you so much for those beautiful words, Suha, and thank you all for coming, and I really appreciate everyone's sacrifice and squeezing in. Congressman Ellison, the many respected guests, Tariq's father, who just also walked in, welcome. We would also make a request that those in the hallway, maybe whoever's in the back, Hamdi, I see you, Tariq's uncle, can you just make sure everybody in the hallway is quiet so that people can hear without interruption? And again, thank you for everyone's patience and waiting. My name is Hassan Shibly, Hassan, last name Shibly, Shibly. I'm an attorney and executive director of CAIR Florida, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and attorney for the Khdeir family. CAIR Florida is probably the largest civil rights advocacy organization that has full-time lawyers that help all victims of discrimination in Florida and victims of government harassment regardless of their race and religion. As an American attorney, what happened to Tariq Khdeir at the hands of a nation that claims to be a democracy and claims to be an ally of the United States and receives billions of dollars of foreign aid really boggles my mind. I mean, because what I've seen happen to Tariq, my client, and what I'm seeing right now happening to his cousins and his family members in retaliation is just unconscionable for somebody who's grown up in a legal system such as ours that respects ideas of due process, right? The judicial process, innocent until proven guilty, and so forth. There are 3 things that really disturb me from a legal perspective in how Tariq and his family have been treated and are currently being treated. First, that the Israeli police can brutally beat a child whose arms are restrained without all the officers involved being brought to justice. You can watch the video. You can go to cairflorida.org, CAIRflorida.org, under videos, and watch the video of Tariq's brutal beating. You see multiple officers were involved. They restrained his hands. One sat on him. The other kept kicking him in the face, kicking him in the guts until he went unconscious, continued to kick his unconscious body, and then dragged him by holding his hands behind his back. You can see the pool of blood left where they beat him. So far, only one of those officers has faced any repercussion, and that's a 15-day suspension. He may face criminal charges. We don't know for sure yet. None of the other officers involved faced any charges. At the same time, the police department, which denied him proper medical care for 6 hours and then took him to see a doctor very briefly. The doctor said Tariq has internal bleeding, he has blood in his urine, and he received severe kicks to the head. He needs to see a specialist, and he needs to go to see a specialist immediately. The Israeli police denied him that request, the request of their own doctor, threw him back in jail for another 4 days without proper medical attention. So none of those officers have been suspended or brought to justice. And what kind of message does that send when Israeli officers can brutally attack one of our own citizens? And it shouldn't matter whether either he's a citizen or not, a child. It's enough that he's a child. And yet, none of those officers, or maybe only one of those officers, faces any sort of repercussion. It almost gives the green light for the police to continue to treat the Palestinian people in such a inhumane way. I'm sure they did not know he was American when they did that, nor did they realize the repercussion that would come from the treatment that they did to him. This will only escalate the violence, because the Palestinian people will see that the Israeli officers can do whatever they want to them. There's no constructive means of engagement, and while nothing can ever justify terrorism, it only pushes people towards destructive engagement when the government that's supposed to protect them is actually brutally attacking them without any repercussions. So we need to ensure that that those officers who attacked Tariq are brought to justice, and that U.S. taxpayer dollars are not funding those kinds of police forces. The second issue that really disturbed me is that the Israeli police can indefinitely detain without detention Palestinian children in jail without charges. Tariq went through all this. To this day, he has not faced any charges, nor has he done anything wrong, nor will he be facing any charges. 3 of his cousins, who were also around his age, were beaten up and arrested with him. They're still in jail to this day without charges. It's unconscionable that a country that claims to be a democracy can lock up children indefinitely without charges, and that we are funding that nation. So this is something that we as lawmakers in this country, as the American public, really need to reconsider. Third, that the Israeli officials can, with impunity, retaliate against the family of Tariq Khdeir by ransacking his home and arresting Tariq's uncle and cousins the night that Tariq returned to the U.S. As Tariq mentioned, the night they left, they went in the home where Suha was staying, and they ransacked the place. We have the pictures available, and they arrested his uncle and cousins. They're still in this jail to this day without any charges, in what is very clearly retaliation because Tariq spoke out about the injustice that the Palestinian people are facing. What has become manifestly clear to me in my representation of the Khdeir family is that the Israeli government has an open double standard that treats a whole class of people worse than second-class citizens because they have a different ethnic background and a different religion. That's what this is all about, because they have a different ethnic background and a different religion. Palestinians are not treated equally before the law. My clients have not been treated equally before the law in Israel. Another example is the double standards we see in home demolitions. We know that those who brutally attacked Tariq's cousin Muhammad, their homes, not only they attack him, but they burn him alive. That is terrorism. Now, their homes were not demolished. And thank God, because I do not believe the homes of any suspect should ever be demolished. That's collective punishment. It's against international law, certainly against US law. Yet the homes of those terrible terrorists who brutally killed the 3 Israeli teens, their homes were demolished right away because the suspects were Palestinians. Again, that's a clear double standard. This kind of double standard will only escalate the conflict. It's not helping alleviate the conflict. Our government cannot continue to fund Israeli police and military so long as Israel continues to engage in gross human rights and civil rights violations, and continues to treat an entire group of people differently because they are of different ethnic or religious origin. Not only because such funding is immoral, but because it is contrary to U.S. national security, as victims of Israeli human rights violations may hold the U.S. accountable for the crimes committed by Israel that are made possible by our tax dollars. In light of the billions of dollars Congress authorizes for Israel annually, we're calling on members of Congress and the executive administration to do everything in their power to, 1, ensure all officers involved in Tariq's beating are brought to justice so as to ensure that this never happens to any other child again. It doesn't matter whether that child is Israeli, Palestinian, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. It doesn't matter. All children should be treated equally under the law. 2, we're calling on the State Department to help secure the release of Tariq's cousins and family members who were wrongfully arrested in retaliation for Tariq speaking out. 3, we must condition further aid to Israel on Israel adopting laws and practices to ensure all people in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank are treated equally before the law, regardless of their race or religion. 4, we are calling on the State Department and Congress and the executive branch to do everything within their power to pressure Israel to ensure that all people have basic due process. There should not be a country in the world, especially not a country that calls itself an ally of the US, that can indefinitely detain children or any person without due process and without charges. Failure for the US to take strong action to ensure that individuals who attack Tariq are brought to justice and the policies and practices which led to the beating are changed will only escalate the conflict, as Israel will feel it can continue to act with impunity. Think about what kind of message that sends the world. Ensuring all people have due process is in everyone's best interest. In fact, the best way to support Israel is to ensure that it abides by the highest standards of due process and the law. What happens to all the officers involved in Tariq's beating and the retaliation against his family and what action the US takes will be very telling as to whether Israel tolerates the mistreatment of Palestinians on an institutional level and whether the US will tolerate that sort of behavior. May God bless America and Israel with leadership that values all human life equally, regardless of race, religion, ethnic origin, or nationality. That will bring peace to the world. Thank you. God bless America, and God bless you all.